Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, and thank you for joining us for the third part of our series, Mysteries of Accessibility. Today's presentation will focus on composing with Microsoft Word and Google Docs. My name is Danny Shapiro, and I'm on the marketing team here at Hawks Learning. Our speakers today are Crystal Trapani and Kristen White of Old Dominion University. Kristen White is an instructional technologist with the Center for Learning and Teaching at Old Dominion University. She's the university's lead Zoom trainer. Kristen has been an integral part of ODU's transition to remote teaching during COVID-19 and continues to develop and facilitate faculty support on topics including Zoom, Blackboard, VoiceThread, Kaltura, and other instructional technologies via workshops, consultations, videos, and support documentation. While building online interactive activities for faculty, she has noticed an absence of basic accessibility knowledge and does her best to inform and educate others on how to make content accessible for all learners. Crystal Trapani is an instructional technologist with the Center for Learning and Teaching and an adjunct instructor in the Department of English at Old Dominion University. Crystal has crafted tech-forward activities for her composition courses over 12 years. She blends her experience working with first-generation and non-traditional students, curriculum development, creating interactive and accessible online course content, and training and mentoring faculty in order to help them achieve positive student outcomes and success. In working with faculty, she helps her colleagues gain strong working knowledge of how her course content can be successful for students of all learning abilities. Crystal continues her commitment to teaching so she can share her personal classroom experience with faculty. We are excited to have everyone with us today and excited to have both of you here to share your experience and insight. This webinar is being recorded and we will send you out a recording. And on that note, I will go ahead and turn it over to you both.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. All right, so this morning we're going to talk to you all about composing with Microsoft Word and Google Docs. And so when you start thinking about accessibility, and this is going to be a little bit of a review for those of you who have been with us the last couple of days, but for those of you who are new, welcome. But when you start thinking about accessibility, it's not about disability at all. Accessibility is about ability and making things easier for everyone. So odds are that you rely on things that are related to accessibility in your daily life. You think about if you go to the grocery store, you walk through the automatic doors. When you go to leave, you take your cart to the curb cut to go to your car. And if you're watching a movie, you might watch it with the subtitles on so you don't wake up somebody in the next room. And so everyone should benefit from your course content. And so you want to start thinking about different ways that impact accessibility. So visibility would include those who have low or no vision, and they might be using screen readers, high contrast settings, magnifiers, and document structure really helps those individuals. And we're definitely going to talk about that today. Audibility includes those who have low hearing or no hearing, and so you want narration in your video. So with subtitles, and you want to make sure you're adding captions. And if you're doing a presentation, having a sign language interpreter is a great thing to have. Mobility kind of includes two things. The first thing would be physical mobility, and that's any sort of range of loss or motion. And then there is kind of one that has been highlighted a lot by a lot of people working from home, which is electronic mobility. And that's the ability to review documents across multiple devices and have them appear the same no matter where someone is looking at the document. Cognition is the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses. And so we have this chart that kind of talks about different types of accessibility. And so it's important to understand that accessibility really helps everyone. And so we have some kind of temporary circumstances here that or situational that you might not think of that students are actually helped by having accessible documents. Visual being if you're working in maybe a dark workspace or a bright workspace, or maybe you're working on mobile technology. Or if you're at home and you're holding a child, or if you're working somewhere noisy, under normal circumstances, probably most of you have a student who works at like a coffee house or something to do their work. But now you also have to think about students who are working from home and, maybe they have multiple children who are also at home and everybody's on Zoom together doing schoolwork. So that would be noisy. And so when we go into kind of the next thinking about 508, any institution that receives federal funding is required by federal law to maintain and provide accessible documents. And so it requires you to make sure anything you're putting out is accessible to your students. And the minute it goes online, be it you distribute it via email or an LMS, it has to meet those 508 web standards. And so accessibility does not have to be a mystery, and it is possible to make your courses accessible. And so I'm going to kind of go through why we set up the things within documents and how they help students with accessibility, and then Kristen's going to go into showing how to do it. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is document properties. These are one of the first things you should actually consider when you're making a document, but a lot of people overlook them because they're almost invisible. They're on the back side. And these are used to help individuals search for documents. And this formatting set is going to help everybody regardless of their learning ability. A screen reader and a computer search will read the document properties. So when you're searching your computer for a document, you can't find it, it's actually searching those document properties. And so the first thing you want is the title of the document, and this should be as close to as identical as the document's title it's listed in the document itself. There are some computer limitations. For example, when you're doing the document properties, like if there's an apostrophe in your title, you won't be able to carry that in. The subject is just giving us what the document's about. The author should be the writer of the document. So it should either be your name, or if you're writing a document for like your department, it should be the department's name. The keywords are going to be words associated with the document during a search and are going to rank the document in those search results. So you should anticipate how our individual is going to search for your document and use those identifying words. And language is the language of the document itself. If this is a document for a foreign language course, for example, it should be the language that appears the most. And you want to make sure you're avoiding any image watermarks, as watermarks are difficult for those with visual and cognitive differences. And if you have to use a watermark, please make sure that the information it contains is also included elsewhere in your document. Unfortunately, and Kristen's going to go into this more in a bit, the only way to adjust the document properties in a Google Doc is with an extension. And so headers are the things that help a user navigate around the document itself. They provide the reader with a visual guidance for how to navigate the page, and they're usually formatted differently than the rest of the text on the page, which provides a clear visual distinction from the rest of the text. They also allow users to skip to a portion of the document without having to scroll through the entire thing. And when a screen reader is reading a document, it actually announces to the individual who's looking at it that they have reached a header. And this is going to help someone with a visual difference navigate that document just as a sighted user would. And if you change the formatting of your text, but not the format it's the header, the screen reader is not going to know to tell that person, hey, you've actually come to a header. And so there are some built-in formatting pieces that you want to make sure you're using. Often people get frustrated. I know Microsoft Word kind of starts that automatic numbering thing and people fight it. You actually don't want to fight it. You want to use those things, as screen readers rely on that background information to navigate the page. And so when you're using any kind of list, you want to use the bullets in the formatting or the numbers, because the screen reader will announce that. Whenever you make a space between paragraphs, I know a lot of people, they hit the end of that paragraph, they hit enter, and then they hit enter again. You actually don't want to do that, because what happens is the screen reader will actually announce that blank line. And so you want to make sure you're using in those built-in formatting options versus adding that extra space, because you don't want that blank line read. And then you want to make sure your text is left aligned versus having it kind of all spread out across the page, and written that justified kind of way, because if it's kind of all stretched out, it actually is incredibly hard for people with dyslexia or other cognitive issues to read the text, because it makes uneven spacing between the words and the letters, and it just makes it difficult to read. When you're starting your document, you want to think about the fonts you're using. There's two kind of main fonts out there, serifs and sans serifs. Your serif fonts are the ones that have the little tails at the end of like the A's and the L's. Your sans serifs do not have that. Sans serifs are considered by some people to be more readable than your serif fonts. There's a bit of like rift between the two kind of camps of people, but either way, no matter which way you kind of fall, you want to make sure that you should aim for a simple font that is very readable. And so you want to make sure your font uses simple, familiar parse spacing. You want to avoid complex characters such as like cursive scripts. Those are hard to read. You want to avoid any kind of ambiguous characters, such as a font where maybe the letter O and a 0 are similar, or a C kind of is nearly closed together and looks sort of like an O. And you want to make sure you're really kind of only using one or two fonts within the document. You want to limit the differences because every time you switch fonts, the reader's having to adjust their reading pattern. You want to think about the spacing and the weight of the fonts. Fonts that have little space between the letters might be hard to read, and the word cool might suddenly look like the word cod if the letters are too close. And fonts that are very light are difficult to read. You want to make sure you have good color contrast between the text and the background, and you really want to avoid small size fonts altogether. When you're formatting your fonts, you want to make sure you're only using all caps for acronyms. When you have all caps written out, what happens is the screen reader will read each letter individually versus actually reading the word that you're trying to make. So when I know a lot of people say only or important, it actually will spell that out versus reading the word. Anytime you use an abbreviation, you want to make sure that you're being clear in what's being read. So like if you abbreviate September, SEPT, the screen reader is going to say sept, and that's not going to make any sense. So you want to be very judicious with using abbreviations. Any kind of acronyms, you want to make sure you provide the full spelling prior to the acronym. So for example, if you were going to abbreviate the FBI, you'd want to say Federal Bureau of Investigation and then FBI in parentheses after it. Any sort of special characters like an asterisk or some dashes, different screen readers have different abilities to read those, and some screen readers can't read them at all. So you want to never use a special character in place of a bullet, use that built-in formatting, and just be very careful. The only time you're underlining should be for URLs. For users with color blindness or low vision, they have trouble distinguishing links from regular text without the underline. And so the underline is a signal to them, hey, this is a hyperlink. So if you're underlining everywhere, you're just making it very difficult for those users. And those font colors, font should never be the only indicator of something that you're trying to communicate. So if you highlight something and you make the font red to get you think, okay, that's getting somebody's attention. But if they have color blindness or low vision, they might not even know that that's red. It's going to look the same as everything else on the page. When you put links in a document or an email is usually kind of the biggest offender on this one. You want to make sure you're actually using descriptive text. And what we mean by descriptive text is that you want to actually use something that tells the reader something about where that link is going to go to. Because when you put in a link versus using descriptive text, Kristen, if you want to go ahead and play the first one.
Link start https://www.google.com/map/dir/height+park +Londo selected N +UK/old+coffee+house +49 +Beak +Street +Soho +London +W1F+9SF +United +Kingdom/at 51.50.
You see where it's going. Yeah, it actually keeps going. The link is actually 2 lines in front of me. You have no idea by the time that link is done what you were even thinking about. But if we put it in as descriptive text, this is what it sounds like when a screen reader reads it.
Link start directions from Hyde Park to the Old Coffee House. Link end on Beak Street using the London Underground.
So the screen reader communicates, hey, this is connected to a link. These are the words included in the link, and it's not reading out that long URL. And it is important to note that if you're linking to a specific type of document, such as a Microsoft Word or a PDF, you include that immediately after the link. That's going to let the reader know that they're clicking a link that will download and open a document. And so after you've completed your document, you should run an accessibility checker to check behind you, because even the most well-intentioned individual is going to miss something when creating a document. I'm really bad about, I always miss alt text on something, and the accessibility checker always yells at me and says, hey, you missed this one. Microsoft Word has a built-in accessibility checker. However, Google Docs does not. In order to check the accessibility in a Google Doc, you either need to download an accessibility checker or download your Google Doc as a Microsoft Word document and run the accessibility checker in Microsoft. Sometimes, just important to note, when you download documents, such as from a Google Doc, some accessibility items don't always carry over successfully, so you want to make sure you do check behind the program. And so at this point, we're going to invite everybody, take a minute, grab either that URL, just note that it is case sensitive, or that QR code. And we're going to actually kind of do some hands-on work on a couple documents. And if you're having trouble with it, just let us know in the chat. And if you could give us a yes once you've got it, or a no if you're having trouble. Yes, address in the chat. I got it.
Oh, I was just putting it.
Oh. You got it. Okay.
Yep.
Well, like we said, if you're having any problems, just give us a shout out. One of us will help you out.
And when you actually go, it should bring you to a folder, and there are 2 documents. The Docs handout you can just open, but for the Word document, you should right-click and download it. Otherwise, you'll be working in Google on the Word document, which isn't going to give you the same look or feel to what we'll be doing. So make sure you download the Word handout, but you can just open the Docs handout. And the first instruction of the Docs handout is how to make yourself a copy, because you currently only have view access. So it goes through how to do the file and make a copy for yourself. And we will be starting in the Word document first. Susan, right above Cody's message, we did provide the link. Were you able to get the link?
I was actually just messaging.
Okay.
You want to jump back to the slide deck for just a second so we
Sure
go over
can.
side by side?
Oh, I forgot about the side by side. I apologize. Bear with me for 1 second. Let me click the right thing for us. Here we go.
So if you're new to kind of working side by side, obviously those of you who have 2 monitors, you'll just spread out over the 2. But Windows users, if you want to split, so you have your screen kind of our Zoom on one side and your document on the other, if you hit that Windows key on the bottom left of your keyboard and the arrow keys, either the left or the right, that'll split them side by side. Mac users, it's a little different. You've got those 3 little dots at the top on your left. The one, it's either going to be gray or green, and that will let you tile those windows.
And once you select either of them, your other program should show up so that you can select the other item to put to the left or right. Okay, so on that note, I am going to start with the Word document. The first thing to note is that both documents have links for accessibility. We do have a checklist as well as a priority list for you. That's if you are trying to change your course or change your course documents. You have already created things. How are you going to decide what to focus on first? This is just a little slide deck we've put together to help you kind of prioritize or think about how you can prioritize what you should start with, because it can be a large task to undertake. And then for the Word document, we have more Word-specific links, but there are some general links. We've also linked to the previous workshops about color and alternative text, as well as the tables one. So if you're looking for more information about those, there's additional links within those previous workshops. And then we are going to start actually going over what Crystal was referring to in the slides. And if you have not noticed, on the left-hand side, as I've started scrolling through the document, it's actually navigating me through the headers. So we'll get there in a second, but I just want, if you don't have this open, I do suggest you open it. And if you are looking for how to do that, if you go to the View tab at the top of your ribbon, and then you go to the Show section, select Navigation pane, and that's what will put the actual navigation on the left. Again, that's going to be something that's going to help your sighted users, as well as anyone who is using the headers to help navigate through the actual headings to get to things. So the first item we are going to talk about is that document properties. Document properties are what we talked about often gets looked over because we don't see them anywhere here to get to them. So how do you actually get to the document properties to provide information for things like when you're doing a search for a document? You would go, and it might look slightly different on your computer depending upon which Word or Microsoft Office you have. But when you go to File and you go to Info, it will then give you the properties on the right-hand side. I've purposely left the title and tags and such open over here so we can input that. So the title for this one, I'm actually going to name it very similar. I'm going to put the Word handout I'm going to put for Microsoft Word. And I might actually, for this one, I'm going to put the accessibility series. It's going to be slightly different just so that it makes sense, because Word handout, Word document, or Microsoft Word might be confusing to somebody. And when I hit enter, it saves it there. The tags are like the keywords. So again, if I know this is about Microsoft Word, that could be one of them. We know it's about accessibility. And we can come up and continue to add more and more tags. It's up to you how many you add, but the tags that you add are going to help it for the search functionality to help somebody find the document. You can add comments if you want. And if you want more properties, you can go to Show Additional at the very bottom, which I just selected. So you can actually add categories, a subject, things like this. They are not all required. The biggest thing is the title and tags on this one, and it automatically defaults in Word to whatever your language or your language default language is for Word. We'll go over how Google works with an add-on to get to those properties though. I do not believe they are case sensitive for the tags.
No.
Okay, so if I go back, because now I've saved that, it's going to save that there. We can now go to the save file. So this is only going to be applicable to your Microsoft Word document because Google is going to auto save, but it is important for you to save in the current file type, so the .docx. Reason being, your accessibility features are only going to be available and be used with assistive technology when we're using that newer type of file type. So I've already actually had this document saved, but I'm going to do File, Save As, so you can see what we're talking about if you're unsure. So I have options. Now, if you're in an older version of Word, you might not have this option, but the .docx is that most current file type, and that's what you would want to select. A lot of documents, if you have an older document, some of the fonts or things may have changed, but you can do a File, Save As and change to the newer file type if you have access to the newer Office. So you can change it after you have an old document. You can open it up with the newer one and save as to get the .docx. So now we're to the headers, and you noticed I don't have these headers, document properties, save file headers on the left-hand side of that navigation. So I've actually made this to look like a header to prove a point. It looks like a header, but I don't have that same ability to navigate through the document, whether I'm sighted or if I'm using a screen reader. So this is why we're talking about it's so important. You'll notice if you're on the home ribbon, when I highlight this text right here, it shows you that I have normal text from the styles. If I want to change it to a heading one, which is the same level heading as the others, I am going to change this by either selecting heading 1, or the second option is to select Control, Alt, and 1. So when I select that, you'll notice it will also move it on the left-hand side of the document. So if you will also do this in your Word document, you're going to select document properties. We're also going to do save file and select heading 1. And we're doing headers, heading 1. And then we're going to stop there for a second and look at the example, because kind of what we were talking about is the fact that for headers, they need to have, you know, a hierarchy. So I'm not going to go from header 1 to header 3. We have to have a header 2 in between those. And so therefore, they're going to kind of fall into a hierarchy in our actual navigation. A great tool as well in Microsoft only, not in Google, is the ability to collapse some of these. So I can actually collapse. So if I don't want to see all of the levels of headings, if I only want to see levels 1, but I have more headings below that in the hierarchy, I can actually collapse it with the arrows. I can also do that for the subheadings. So we have headers as level 1. I want bad example to be level 2 or heading 2. And when I want to change it, again, I can highlight the text and go to heading 2, or I can select Control-Alt-2. Either way, it will add the bad example. And now you can see that it's part of my headers on the left-hand side. Same thing I'm going to do for the good example. I'm going to make it a level 2. And in the global warming, we actually have this as a level 1 to show how it should be a hierarchy. We have a heading 1. A heading 2 is the main idea of this, this next section, which are the causes. And then we have subtopics for those, including deforestation, ozone depletion, and greenhouse effect. So if I was reading a paper for my student, this would also be helpful for me for grading too. If I need to revisit something as a faculty member, I can jump to a specific section of the paper myself as well. But this is going to help your students when you're giving them documentation to be able to get to and from places. Yes, it did put in a space. That's an automatic thing for headers. If you do want to make changes to that, there are ways to actually edit your styles. We're not going to go into the editing of the styles because there's a lot to get through, but there are links about the headings in the very beginning under the Microsoft Word resource links. But yes, you are correct. It did add some spacing. That's also going to help to separate it so your sighted learners, if they're doing a quick look, they can see that hierarchy and how it works, and it's going to make it easier to read with a little bit of spacing. When it butts up to each other, it makes it a little bit more hard for readability as well. So those are built-in features from Word itself. So you can continue on. I'm just going to do it through that specific one, but the documents should be like, this should technically be a heading 1. I can do it as I move through it by just doing my Control-Alt. Control-Alt-1, Control-Alt-2, or Control-Alt-3. So I'll do that as we go through the document. You don't need to go through the entire document right now to add it, but this is going to be, as we're going through, if I was fixing my document, a quick way to do it. So the next thing we are going to focus on is the built-in formatting. And again, this was referring to like lists and alignment and things like that. So we're going to focus on lists and alignment. Now, this first example actually looks like a list. However, it was made not using the built-in formatting. So again, it's not going to be announced for anyone who is using a screen reader or assistive technology. And also some symbols are actually not read out loud. So that could cause another issue. It's not noting anything to make it sound like it goes together for a student using a screen reader. So for this, we actually used an asterisk, and we also used an increase indent. So in order to fix this, we would have to delete the actual asterisk and move it over. We have two options. We can either decrease the indent or delete or backspace. And then if we want to make it into a bullet, we can actually just quickly select bullets. The only thing is when you're fixing something like this, it's not as easy as just, selecting. Once you have bullets, you can actually edit all of them at the same time. But because these are not a built-in format, we have to actually delete them individually to make them fall into the list. I find it easier to go to the line that's already formatted and select delete and then enter to get it into that bulleted list. So that would be what you would do to fix it, to make it into the bulleted list. And then for the alignment, which we talked about, this justified right now, and you would notice this, something we were talking about is newspapers always use justified more or less. And it's actually much more difficult to read because the spacing is not consistent between letters and words, which is going to make it very difficult, especially for your students with dyslexia. So this, if you are trying to figure out if yours is justified or not, I can tell, but that's also because I'm working with this. If you're looking to figure out if it's left aligned or not, when you go to the paragraph and then go to the paragraph under your home ribbon, you can tell if it's left aligned or justified. That justified is the one that has the lines that are the equal distance. You don't want it that way. You simply would make this, and we can select left justified, and it fixes it really quick for that one. Not hard at all. Versus this good example, which I'm going to make a heading 2 really quick with Control-Alt-2. And we have a numbered list. So kind of what I was talking about when you select the number or the bullet, if you want to edit that, what's great about that is you can change it all at once. That's one great feature on top of this, helping people with are both sighted and those that are using a screen reader, because it's going to identify that those items belong together for them as it announces them. So I'm just going to leave it as a numbered list. And we already have this one, and we can tell up here that it's a left aligned already. So let's take a look at this worked example. I'm going to make this a heading 2, and then the original I'm making a heading 3 with Control-Alt-3. And I'm going to make the accessibility guidelines a third level as well, which is Control-Alt-3, or going to the top for the heading. So we're actually going to edit the one below. We're going to edit the to meet accessibility guidelines. Crystal, there's a question.
I got
it. You can try to address it. Thank you. So the document types, as we can see, we've used a dash. Again, it's not formatted as a list, so we have to delete that. So this is the one, if you are needing or would like to follow along and do this with us, we always find that we learn better by doing than just watching. So we're deleting that dash, and we are deleting that extra space. And I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, I actually want a bullet, but I want it to be this box bullet, and it's going to change it. Again, you can delete, and enter, and it's going to help fix this so that it is in a list format for your learners. And I'm not saying this, your bold doesn't always mean it has to be a header. You can use that for emphasis. You can use italics for emphasis. But sometimes we will tell you italics can actually be difficult to read depending upon the text. So make sure you're taking that into account. If it makes it difficult for you to read, it's going to make it difficult for somebody who has a visual difference, definitely. So take that into account in regards to when you are using the italics. But the underline, like we said, is for the hyperlinked text. Now here we have the numbers, so we can delete. This is taking a little bit more to delete because there is a period after that. We can select whichever we would like. We could, I could make this a 1 with a parentheses. And again, I find it easiest to delete and pull it up and then enter to make it go into the actual numbered list. And you would continue on for all of them until you have your numbered list complete. So it is definitely easier to do this, from the get-go rather than after the fact, because it's taking many more clicks for me to actually fix all of this than to have it use that automatic formatting in here. So we did mention that space between paragraphs. So as you noted when we started using the headers, so I'm going to actually make this a header 1 now that we're here, it adds that space. That is part of the built-in formatting. So it's okay that that space is there. I'm adding a level 2 and a level 3. I'm sorry, level 2, level 2s, because they're a good and bad example. And here you'll notice that I can't click the space in between bad example and the first paragraph. And that is because that extra space after bad example was part of the header format. So that's okay. However, you'll notice I can click the space in between the paragraphs and below that last paragraph. So instead of doing the enter to create that space, what we've done on this good example is when we are in the paragraph form, we can actually highlight it all if we want to do it all at once. I'm actually going to just show you from the paragraphs. there's this up down arrow. This is the line and paragraph spacing from within the home tab under the paragraph section. If you use the drop down arrow, we have added the space. If we remove it, you see it pulls it all together. If I go off of it, you see it added that space. So if we wanted to fix this previous one, I would delete that extra space. And then when I go to the paragraph and I add a space, it automatically puts that spacing so it's easier to read. And it's not going to announce that extra space in between. So once I add the extra space, it's going to make it look the same as that good example and the same as it looked before, except it's not going to give that extra reading of, oh, I'm announcing to you there's a space here. So now let's take a look at bullets, because sometimes bullets you want to add either maybe a little bit more space or in general, you're not going to make it be less space. It's usually you might want more space. So if I want to actually change this to a larger space, and I'm going to go under my edit to meet accessibility guidelines one. If I want to change it, it automatically defaults to 1.15, which is a built-in spacing. And that's generally good enough because it's giving you enough space in between the bullets for somebody who is sighted to see that there is more than one item and it's not too close together to read. However, if you really wanted to change the spacing, there are built-in ones. 1.5 might be okay. Anything over that, it might get a little bit too far apart to make it the students still have that spatial understanding that they belong together. So you don't want to make too much space, but you can change it from that same area. And if you did want to change it on a different level, like if I wanted 1.25, if I select custom, I can go into the spacing and after, at the very right-hand side of that, I can add 1.25, let's say, instead of the 1.15. You'll notice it added just a slight difference to my spacing. But generally that built-in amount should be enough to make it easily visible to everyone that has sight, that it is a list, but that you can tell the difference that there are separate lines. And then we have our second example where we have these extra spaces. So in those extra spaces, you remember want to delete the spaces, and I'm just making my headers. So if we are jumping later, I can quickly jump back if you have questions about something. And I need to make that a 3, there we go. I'm going to delete that extra space after both of those paragraphs. And remember, it's simply going to that paragraph and add a space after paragraph. That it should do it for that one. This one, it didn't like me. Oh, I know I didn't like, I have to add it here. I didn't highlight all of it at one time. Also, so you'll notice that it added the space, but again, when we add this heading of the level 1, it's going to add additional space because of that built-in heading spacing. The next piece, which we were referring to the sans serif and serif, as well as the using, a lot of people like to use a script. A script font is very difficult for someone to read. You know, it's hard enough to read some of the sans serif or the serif ones, let alone some of these script ones, because the tails or the pieces in between, there is no spacing. They actually touch in most of these scripts. So it's very difficult, especially for someone who would have like dyslexia, to determine what type of letter it is, because it doesn't have that consistent spacing between. So here is an example. This is actually in Lobster, and Lobster is a script font. And I would say that Lobster is one of the more difficult ones to read. This is a 12-point font, but even if we make this larger, it's still not great to read, even for someone who is a sighted learner. That's going to be more difficult for me for readability. So this is actually an example of a sans serif font. So it doesn't have the tails or the feet at the bottom. It's going to have a consistent spacing between the letters and the words. So that's going to make it a little bit easier to read. Versus here's our worked example, and I'm just going to make sure I'm adding my, I'm going to add my headings just so we can jump back if we need to later. And this example is actually in what's called E.B. Garamond, and it is considered a serif font. It does have those little feet, and I'll make it a little bit larger so you can see those feet because I know it is small on the screen. But obviously, if you're using a larger font, it's somewhat easier to read, but those feet are making it more difficult to tell where some of them begin and end and things like that. So this is, while a serif font can be used, this is probably not the best serif font to choose because it is lighter too in the smaller font. So we can choose a different font from up here. Now, I will tell you, unfortunately, in here, I can't make it filter between serif and sans serif or anything like that. We'll show you how to do that in Google though. But I can choose a different font that might work better. So for instance, Verdana is a serif or sans serif font. I can select that. There are other ones as well. I'm trying, Times New Roman would work technically. It's a little bit easier to read than the other one. So these are, you can use serif fonts, but generally speaking, a lot of people do tend to use the sans serif versus the serif fonts. So I'll make that back to 12, but this one's definitely still easier to read than this one. To me, it's darker and it's I feel like I don't have as difficult of a time to delineate between the letters because of the spacing and such. Just checking because I keep seeing Zoom pop up.
I got it.
Yep. Okay. She's going to give that to you.
I'm getting the link.
Okay. The next item is conveying meaning in color. So a lot of times people use color, and that's the only way they're representing a difference or what you're wanting the students to gain information from. The problem with that is if you have somebody, and we'll go through the color blindly when we get to the Google, the Google Doc, I cannot do it on Word. But if you are colorblind and you are trying to identify what each bar represents here, you are looking at this small little box and you are trying to match it up. Now, mind you, the legend on the Word document is at least close. So spatial contiguity, it's close to where those bars are, but that's not always the case. And so you should have a second way of conveying meaning, not just color. So as you can see in this next one, we have changed it. We have given it a label. So although they might not be able to tell this is the color of exam one, we can actually put that exam one is this actual bar so that they can make that connection because they may not otherwise be able to make that connection. So now we're going to look at two examples. Oh, I did forget to mention on your charts and your tables, don't forget to add your alternative text, which is a right click and edit to add alt text. If you're looking for information on that, make sure you check out the previous link for the workshop on color and alternative text as well for that kind of stuff. Okay, so now we're going to look at the next example. I'm just, again, making my headings really quick. Okay, so I am going to actually edit this second one. And the first item we are looking at in the chat, what do you see is wrong with this first sentence? Anyone see what's wrong with the first sentence in the Word document? Do not forget to turn in your research paper by this Friday. Red text for emphasis. We only have red. So what could we possibly do to make it so that if somebody does have a color blindness of any sort, we could do? Exactly. So we're going to add a second way of doing an emphasis. We could do something as simple as adding bold, because they're going to be able to tell there's something different about it, even if they can't tell the color is different. So that one was a really simple one. The second one is something we often see in charts or tables, I'm sorry. And a lot of times they're telling you, okay, well, you know, when you see this color, it means this. And when you see this color, it means this. However, if I can't tell which is which, I don't know what you're trying to convey to me. So this one says English courses, red are required and green are not required. What can we do to this table to make it so that it would be accessible and have meaning conveyed in more than just color? Anyone have any idea about that? You can throw it in chat. Okay, you could do headers, but okay, a symbol, okay. So we need to tell them, okay, so for instance, if we were gonna do a symbol, we could say red and R. I could, and it's going to change it. And I'm actually going to do green and not required. And we can actually put that, and it's going to change it automatically because it's the other. This way, a student can still tell because I've given them another indicator to convey the meaning. So I've told them that, okay, when we see red, well, if I can't see red, if I see the R, I know it's required. So it's okay to do it this way. We can still have the color there, but we have to convey it in another means. So we have the R and NR. An additional way you could have done it was to add another column. If you wanted to, you could insert a column to the right and you could put required and just put yes, no next to it instead. That would be another way, something different to do as well. So again, for tables and if you go to your table properties, I did not add it, but in the tables one, it goes over how to add your table and description here. That's your description is your alternative text that should be added. And because we were downloading this is what we were talking about when Crystal said, when you download from somewhere else, you still have to check everything. This was actually downloaded from our Google Doc and edited to make it into some of the word pieces. And it did not take everything we had in the Google Doc. So that's why it's important you still check, even if you've made it accessible in one way. If you change the type of document it is, you still need to recheck it and retag. For instance, a lot of people using PDFs, you do still have to check the tagging. Okay, so font formatting. Here's a fun one. And I'm going to make this a level 1 heading, and our bad example and good example 2s, and worked example a 2. So I can quickly jump to them. And I'll make my original a 3. And I'm just making this quickly so that we have them ready to go. So the first one, read all the instructions. Who could tell us what's wrong with that first line? Read all of the instructions. The underline, definitely. There's one more thing specifically wrong with that one. Any other ideas? Yes, all caps. So we're not using an acronym here, so it's going to read ALL. It's not going to be useful for somebody. So instead, we might change it. So it's got bold and italics, which is fine. But if we want to change this, we can highlight it. You can actually right-click as well if you would like to get to some of the formatting tools. Otherwise, if you highlight it and go up to the top left in the ribbon of home, you have that font area to play with things. So we could take away the underline. And that could be it. We could just take off the capitals and make it lowercase. And I'm actually going to make this all lowercase though, because, and it's not going to make it bold. So bear with me for a second. Oh, it's going to take me, hold on one second. I apologize. I'm going to make those bold. I can have it so that it's bold and lowercase, but let's say that's not enough. We can also add color. So it's okay to still add color, but we already have the bold to show something. So that's okay if you add color, but that all caps and underline wouldn't work. What about the second one? Crystal brought this up during the slide section. Read chapter 12 to 15. That's how I read it as a sighted learner. Yes, the abbreviation for chapter is literally going to be read the dash. Good. Lisa, I wonder if you were in our tables one the other day too. But when you have a screen reader, most of the time it will literally read, and then it's going to take a pause because of the period. And then it will say 12, 15. If I was a non-sighted, learner, I would have difficulty ascertaining what you were trying to get across in that one. So in that case, we could change to chapter, and we could literally just change the dash to the word to, and I would have a better understanding if I was hearing it from the screen reader itself. And the last one, who could tell me what's wrong with number 3 for the bad example? Ensure your document is ADA compliant. We have all caps, but it is an acronym, but there is no explanation. Good. So in this case, what we should do is actually put the ADA after it. We can then use ADA over and over within the document, but we first need to identify what that stands for. So that is the Americans with Disability Act. And then we have 88 after. And then any other time throughout the document, I can refer to 88 as 88. I don't need to write Americans with Disability Act over and over again, but I do need to identify it in the initial time that it appears within the document. So now our good example has more of, I have the reminder, it's in bold, but it's not in all caps. We have the USDA, but it's already spelled out, United States of our Department of Agriculture. And then the ampersand, and we did give you, and I saw somebody put this in the chat, the ampersand is actually one of the safe symbols. And up here in the characters, we did give you a link. It tells you a little bit about some of the characters that do read or are more or less safe for most screen readers. So that's a great resource if you're looking to see which ones can and can't be used. The ampersand generally is read correctly. So that's why I use that to show you it's okay to use that within your document. Okay, so we have one more example under the worked example. So we've added even more. What's wrong with this first line? Welcome to English 101. Yes, so it's simple undoing the underline from this one would fix that. What about let's look at that bullets. I
got it.
Okay. Yes, we have all caps the entire way. So we would need to rewrite this as read the entire syllabus before taking the quiz. And then I can take that other part away. And if I want to emphasize entire, what would be something else we could do? And because we also had an underline there, which we've already brought up, our underline. So what else could we do to this to emphasize entire? Yes, we could use italics, and we could even, if we really wanted to, and that might be hard to read, I might take off the italics and make it at least a different color. The italics, that kind of what we were talking about. Sometimes it's not as easy to read, so you might not want to use bold and italics together.
Somebody suggested in private message to me, increase the font size.
Yes, you could possibly do that as well. And I know we had entire that way as well before that. Okay, how about the second one? Have questions, post them in the water cooler DB. It's literally going to read DB. Yes, thank you. Dr. Groom, I forgot where that was. That's why I didn't use it. I knew there was a way to do it. So what would we have to fix in the second bullet? Yeah, the DB is the issue. Does anyone know what we're referring to? A lot of faculty use this one. Yes, you need to know what it means. It actually stands for discussion board. A lot of people put DB and don't know what DB is. So if we wanted to use DB throughout, we could use it as, an abbreviation later. We could technically put discussion board and then put DB to show that's what we're referring to later if we wanted to use an abbreviation. I don't know how, unless you're using it over and over, that you would need to, but you definitely need to identify what that meant, because a lot of people might not know what you're referring to, especially if they're new to using an LMS. They might not have a clue that there's something even called a discussion board. So something to make sure. This next one is similar. What are we missing from the third bullet? Yep. So the MLA should technically be spelled out that first time as Modern Language Association, and then we can make it so that it's MLA for further down in our document. This last one is a hard one because we have this symbol, and I'm just going to talk about it really quick because it's kind of a tricky one, because in MLA and APA, they actually tell you when you are, condensing, right? Crystal, or what was the word that you condensing, kind of like what is being said, and you're taking it down, right? You're sparing it down, that you use the ellipses, but not all screen readers identify them. So unless you're using it for the format for MLA or APA, avoid it as best you can. That was part of the reason why we put that in here, because some people do just type out the ellipses just to have it within language, and it really should not be used other than for the citations themselves based on it not being read. Okay, Now we are on to the descriptive links. Oh, wow, we are like really almost out of time. I apologize. I'm not going to do the formatting really quick. So the first one is not even an active link. So that's one problem. We have changed it. So we've made descriptive link by doing a right click and link, or I can also do the insert and go to link from the top area. And I can change what it says. So the text to display, I can actually type in Purdue OWL MLA formatting and style guide. Otherwise, I might not know where it's bringing me. If I'm reading, I mean, I can decipher because I'm a sighted learner, but if I'm listening to this, I'm going to have a hard time figuring out where I'm going. So this, when I do the text to display, it actually changes it into a active link, which is the biggest thing. And the second one is that it actually has a description to give me context of where I'm being brought to. And we're not going to actually go through this worked example because that's in essence what it is. You would need to actually, this is like a DOI link, and that's fine in a citation. But if you're linking to an article for your students to read, you want to give them that descriptive text and link out to it. Don't give them just the link for the DOI. And the last thing to do is actually run the Microsoft Accessibility Checker. If you're unfamiliar with this, if you go to the Review tab and select Check Accessibility, it's going to give you anything that it finds does not meet accessibility. That doesn't mean it finds everything. There are certain things that we talked about today that it will not flag, like the extra space in between your paragraphs and things like that. It's not going to flag everything, but it will bring up things that you might be missing. So I have alternative text missing. That's going to give me the option of actually going right there and adding it from there. So it's going to give you a way to make those changes and note some of those changes you may have missed as you've gone through the document. So I know that was quick. I'm going to go to the Google side and talk about the differences really quick about how to do some of those things. So on the Google side, one thing to note is you have to have an add-on for the document properties. We have the add-on called Grackle Docs. If you go to add-ons and search for or get add-ons, you can get this as well. It is only a 30-day free trial. We have a paid subscription through our university though. When you go here, if you go to the hamburger icon at the top right and go to document properties, it will allow you to change the title of the document. You can use the same Google name. You can add a subject. You can change the name to your name. It usually defaults to your email associated with your Google. You can add those keywords or tags again. And can you address how to get the accessibility checker? Thank you. And you can also change the language on Google much easier because it's going to be, it automatically defaults to English, but you can change it unless you're in a different area. I believe it goes based on your Chrome. And then when you're done, you can select update. So that's the one main difference for the document parts. Headers are similar, except we don't have all those different areas in our toolbar. So I'll show you where to get to some of these things. So we have instead, we have this drop down of normal text, title, subtitle, heading 1. You can also use those same shortcuts of the Control-Alt-1, Control-Alt-2, Control-Alt-3, and so on to make it into those headers. And I'm going to the correct one. I'm going to the one that we actually created the headers in so I can jump to these areas for you. The built-in formatting. Oh, and we noticed earlier, it automatically saves, so you don't need the save feature. And simply for the formatting, it goes left to right. So you are looking to see this one is justified. You can see the justified from left to right versus this one is the left align. And then you have your numbers and bullets. And that's a similar, we have a lot of similar looking icons here. They work the same with the spacing, except it looks a little different. The custom spacing is down. The add and remove is now in the middle instead of the bottom for Google. So they're the same things, same ideas, but they're located in slightly different areas. So that's that space between. The readable fonts, here's where I was talking about what's great is if you go to the more fonts, you can show all just sans serif. So you can actually filter to get to just sans serif if you would like to. So that gives you a little bit ease of finding one that might work better, and you can simply check it and select OK, and it would add it to changing your font, and you would have that option here to change it to then. Making sure font formatting. Okay, I'm just making sure there's one more thing that's different in here, and I'll do the descriptive links really quick. So I already have a descriptive link here. If I wanted to add a descriptive link, similar, I can right click and go to link, or at the top, I have that link icon and I can add a link. You can also link to other documents from your Google Drive directly, which is a great tool.
There's a question that was asked
yes.
in chat. I'm going to answer it out loud.
Good.
And it said, is there a free add-on to help with Google Docs? Unfortunately, there is not. The workaround is you can download your Google Doc as a Microsoft Word doc and run the accessibility checker in Word.
Yes. And again, you're still going to want to check those other things because it might not copy over exactly the right way. So Grackle, that add-on, I'm just going to show you really quick. If I launch it, it runs, I believe, 22 checks. And I can go through it similar to the accessibility checker in Word or Microsoft. However, it shows me everything. It doesn't only show me my errors. So it's slightly different in that. If I want to, so I knew my tables weren't tagged, I can actually go to that area, select the table, and I can mark the headers from here. And it pulls you right to what needs to get fixed as well, similar to the Word document. And I know that we are out of time, and I really apologize. There was a lot to get through today. These documents are all available for you to use and play with. We are also going to add a link directly to the slides from within this handout folder that we gave you access to. And we thank you for joining us. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Danny.
No, that was great. Thank you so much for taking the extra time. Am I coming through all right? I'm not having a feedback this time. Okay, great. So appreciate you going a little extra, answering everyone's questions. Thank you to our audience for attending. If you have questions for us, you can email us at marketing@hawkslearning.com. We'll send you the recording, a link to the blog where you can do the past sessions, as well as sign up for our 2 sessions next week. So hope everyone has a great rest of their Friday and a great weekend. Take care.